Today we're going to be talking about proteins, kind of continuing the trilogy of macronutrients, because last week we talked about carbohydrates. And then, yeah, if you haven't already, you can put your favorite protein in chat. Luckily today there's not that many food pictures like there were last time, so and okay, let me make sure that you can see the full slideshow because I think there's a lot of stuff on my screen, so I hope it's not getting cropped off. And yeah, if you haven't already put your favorite protein in chat, feel free to do that. And let's get started. So just like a brief recap of what we talked about last week, right? Like macronutrients are basically the nutrients that provide calories or basically energy, and they're required in large amounts to maintain our body. And basically without any of these macronutrients, we wouldn't function. So without fats, if you like cut out all fats or cut out all carbohydrates or cut out all proteins from your diet, you wouldn't function properly because these are required for basically everything that you do. So today we're going to be talking about protein and specifically we'll talk about like what protein is kind of made out of. So that's going to be kind of more like biochem, and then we'll talk more in detail about nutrition science for like what proteins, like we'll go over what proteins functions are, and then like how we kind of classify proteins. Unlike carbohydrates, there's not that many ways that we classify proteins. Like proteins are literally just, you just call them proteins. But yeah, so let's get started. This is like one of the few food pictures, but yeah, this is a picture of like various different foods that have proteins. Like it's given that any animal meat has protein in it, and then surprisingly, like apparently blueberries have protein, although probably not a very like large amount, and also like nuts and stuff have protein in them too. And basically protein is like it's present in every single cell. This is all raw food. So if this is making you hungry, you should probably eat soon. And so protein is basically in every single one of our cells, and we have to eat protein. Basically, it's basically important for all of the functions in our body, but the main parts of our body that are that like rely on protein are our muscles, right? Like you might make that connection because like bodybuilders eat a lot of protein powder. Also our bones, and then our tissues, because our tissues are basically made up of proteins. So we're first going to take a closer look at proteins. Okay, so proteins are basically just made out of amino acids. So these smaller units are just called amino acids. And the reason why they're called amino acids is because, as you can see in like the diagram, they all have an amino group. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but that's the NH2. I'm not sure why the 2 is right there. It should be after the H.
I can see your mouse.
You can't see it? All right.
Then... I can see your mouse.
Oh, you can? Okay, that's great. So yeah, this is the amino group. Every single amino acid has the amino group, hence the name amino acid. And then every single amino acid also has a carboxylic acid, or also just known as a carboxyl group, which is COOH. But what differentiates one amino acid from another amino acid is the side group, or the R group. It'll probably be called an R group in like any bio classes or chemistry classes that you take. But basically, the R group is what differentiates every amino acid from each other. And for humans, there's basically there's more than 20 amino acids, but naturally there's only 20. And us humans, we can't get all of them. Like our bodies can't produce all 20 amino acids. So there's basically two different types of amino acids with respect to humans. There's essential amino acids, and then there's non-essential amino acids. So basically, non-essential amino acids aren't essential in our diet because we don't, so basically our body can actually make these non-essential amino acids. Therefore, we don't really need to worry about including them in our diet. But on the other hand, there are essential amino acids, which are essential for our diet. And Essential amino acids can either be used on their own, or in some cases, they can be transformed into a non-essential amino acid. So these essential amino acids, basically, we have to eat these through our diet. So basically, all the proteins that you eat, you want to include all 20 different types, well, not all 20, only the non-essential amino acids, because we don't really eat, well, we don't need to focus on eating the essential types of amino acids because our body produces sufficient amounts of them. And this is a really cool picture. Basically, it shows the R groups of all the 20 common amino acids, and all the ones that are like circled with a dotted line are the essential ones. So how many of them are there? How many essential amino acids are there?
9?
Yep, there's 9. Yeah, there's 9 essential amino acids, and we'll talk more about this later, but basically in our diet, we're really only just focusing on these 9 amino acids that we can't produce ourselves. And then the other 11 amino acids, our body can synthesize or produce by itself, so we don't really need to eat them. And this is basically how we can so this is basically getting into how we can connect these small amino acids to make the larger picture or protein. So the dehydration reaction, if you take AP Bio or just any biology class, it'll be talked about a lot because it's actually the dehydration reaction, it happens in carbohydrates and also lipids, but we're going to just talk about it regarding protein. So basically, at the molecular level, so we're looking really, really close, we can form a peptide bond through this dehydration reaction. And basically this peptide bond just connects to amino acids. And if you look at the picture, this diagram, basically one amino acid will donate in oxygen and a hydrogen, and then this other amino acid will just donate a tiny hydrogen reaction. And what these form, what does H2O form? Well, water. So the reason why it's called a dehydration reaction is because you produce a water when you make this peptide bond, and yeah, you're just producing water. I feel like in my mind that doesn't really make sense because dehydration should mean taking water away. So in a sense, we're taking the water away from 2 amino acids put together. And yeah, we'll be doing a Kahoot or a gym kit at the end because I got the free trial. So yeah, basically, and the dehydration reaction is through a dehydration reaction, water and a peptide bond that connects to amino acids is produced. And that's basically all you really need to know about dehydration reactions for proteins. And then once we do start combining these amino acids, we form these peptides, which are basically just chains of amino acids. So tripeptide, like the prefix tri suggests, that's 3 amino acids, and then oligopeptide is just 3 to 10. And then the most common one that you'll hear about is a polypeptide, which is 10 or more amino acids. And polypeptides, that's the most common type of peptide because a 3 or even 3 to 10, that's a really, really short peptide, and it's not really commonly found, especially in our bodies. So most peptides most peptides or proteins in our body are contained of polypeptides. Rarely they're made out of oligopeptides or tripeptides. So now that we understand amino acids and peptides, what about the larger picture of proteins? Okay, wait, wrong button. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about making proteins. So that includes how we synthesize proteins, because we just talked about what proteins are made of. They're just made of amino acids, but how do we actually put together all these different amino acids to make proteins? And it's actually a really intricate process that we won't go too in depth today. I'll just go over it kind of briefly, but there's a lot to it. And then we'll go over the structure of proteins. So some background knowledge. I'm going to go over some background information so we can better understand protein synthesis. So DNA is made out of 4 nucleotides, C, G, A, and T. Does anybody know which nucleotide C pairs with? So like, if you look at this picture, this diagram, you'll notice that like green only pairs with blue and red only pairs with yellow. And it's because C only pairs with one certain nucleotide, G only pairs with a certain nucleotide, A only pairs with one certain nucleotide, and T, or thymine, only pairs with one nucleotide. So C, G, A, and T, these are all abbreviations, but we'll just call them that for simplicity. No, C doesn't pair with T. C pairs with G, and then A pairs with T. And that's kind of just, it's kind of like a cool code, I guess. So you know that if on one side of a DNA you see a C, then the one that's connecting to it must be a G. So that's kind of just like a pattern of the DNA. And DNA has like a double helix structure. So what that means is like, it's basically like a spiral staircase with 2 railings. And so it's basically just 2 strands that are like connected together. And then it's woven up into like a double helix structure. But then on the other hand, we have RNA. So RNA just stands for ribonucleic acid, whereas DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, but we just refer to it as DNA and RNA really. And RNA is also made out of 4 nucleotides, except instead of T, it uses U, or it's called uracil. So basically, now in RNA, instead of A pairing with T as it would in DNA, RNA has A pair with U. So basically, if you had like a direct actually you can't have a direct copy of, okay, backtracking really quick, but RNA is different from DNA most, other than the fact that it doesn't have any T. RNA is only 1 strand, so it's not a double helix structure. It's not really called like a single helix structure either. It's just 1 strand. Oops. Okay. And basically, if you were to take 1 strand of the DNA and you wanted to make it into RNA, you just replace all of the T's in that 1 strand of RNA with U's, because you can't really take a DNA and make it RNA because you have to, RNA is only 1 strand. So you'd always have to remove one of the strands from DNA to make it into an RNA. Does that make sense so far? Feel free to stop me or like put questions in chat because I check it pretty frequently, or it's up, so I'm checking it constantly. But yeah, that's a little like crash course on DNA and RNA. And then this is just kind of like the different types of cells. So there's a lot more to cells than just prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, but this is all that's really important to us. And the main thing that we have to realize is that like eukaryotic cells, which is basically the majority of cells that we're made up of, actually most of the cells that we're made up of are eukaryotic cells. And eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells, like the main difference, that's like the most important difference or the most important difference between these 2 types of cells is that eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. On the other hand, a prokaryotic cell does not have a nucleus. So the nucleus is basically where like our genetic information is stored. Like DNA or our chromosomes can all be found in a nucleus of a eukaryotic cell. But since a prokaryotic cell doesn't have this nucleus or this little like sphere to hold all of our genetic information, like the DNA and the chromosomes in a prokaryotic cell are kind of just like floating around. There's not a specific area or the specific organelle to hold the genetic information. So that's like the main difference for eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. If you have a question, you can feel free to like private chat it to me or anything like that. Okay, so then we'll go into protein synthesis. Protein synthesis is definitely pretty complicated, so we're just going to like skim over the top of it. And like this is called the central dogma or dogma, however you want to pronounce it. And basically, how we produce a protein is we start with DNA, which is in all of our eukaryotic cells. Well, all cells actually, because prokaryotic cells also have DNA. But we basically start with DNA, and then DNA basically gets transcribed into RNA, and then RNA basically gets transcribed into protein. So basically, the whole process of protein synthesis is converting DNA to RNA, and then converting RNA into the protein that we want to make. And essentially, like, our DNA is really cool because, like, it's basically what the DNA is coding for is it's just coding for, like, the various proteins that we need inside our bodies. So we'll basically, if we want to, for instance, I'll just take like a hemoglobin protein. Let's say we want to synthesize a hemoglobin protein. Well, then we look at like a really, really small fragment of our DNA, and then we convert that part into RNA, and eventually we can produce a protein. And basically, protein synthesis is happening in our bodies like constantly because we constantly need to make proteins, because proteins are necessary for like various parts, or they have various functions in our body, which we'll get to later. But yeah, let's just get right into it. So the first part is transcription, and this GIF or GIF is pretty cool. It's obviously magnified a lot, but
GIF.
or GIF, if that's what you want to call it. But basically, transcription is like the first part of protein synthesis, and it's basically converting DNA into RNA. So during transcription, you basically produce mRNA. So mRNA just stands for messenger RNA, but just think of it as RNA for now. And in the GIF, GIF or GIF, you see a large like yellow thing, and that's basically just an enzyme. And what it's doing is basically it's reading this strand of DNA that's coming into it right here. So this is the DNA that's like kind of getting fed into it. Actually, it's not getting fed into it. This enzyme is like moving along this DNA. And basically what's happening is this enzyme is like reading the DNA and then making a complementary RNA strand, which is the thing coming out the bottom here. So the difference, you can tell that this bottom one here is RNA because it's only one strand. It's not like two strands together. And so this is the mRNA, but the DNA, it just goes back out again, like nothing changes. And so like the DNA has nothing changed to it, but we get to produce an mRNA, which will eventually be used to produce a protein. And in our cell, this transcription stage occurs in the nucleus. So for this, when I'm talking about protein synthesis I'm just going to be talking about protein synthesis for eukaryotes, because for prokaryotes, it's like it doesn't happen in specific areas. So I'm just going to be referring to protein synthesis in eukaryotic cells. So this first part, right, like DNA is found in our nucleus, right? Like chromosomes and DNA is just found in our nucleus. So the first part of protein synthesis is just going to happen where DNA is found, or the nucleus. So this transcription, which is the first step, happens in the nucleus. Okay, so after that, we have a process called RNA processing. This is unique to eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells don't have this at all, so that's what makes eukaryotes kind of more complex than, let's say, like a prokaryotic cell. Also, like prokaryotic cells are usually found in things like bacteria, so like they're obviously not as complex as like in living organism, like humans. So yeah, eukaryotic cells are definitely more complex. And so basically what's happening in RNA processing is like the mRNA that's produced from transcription isn't perfect. So basically this RNA processing stage, a bunch of enzymes basically just come into the nucleus, or in the nucleus, and they basically just help touch up this strand of RNA. So that all that's left of the mRNA or the RNA is the part that we actually want. So the end product of RNA processing, like this pink strand right here, this is all going to code for the protein that the DNA itself encoded for. So remember, like in transcription, this RNA is complementary to the DNA, meaning like all of its nucleotides match up to one of the strands of the DNA. And basically what that means is like this specific sequence, if we just change it up a tiny bit, it would code for either a totally different protein, or it wouldn't code for a protein at all because it just doesn't code for something anymore. Like it's lost its meaning because it's not a specific one that our body knows how to create. But basically, the second step, RNA processing, only happens in eukaryotic cells, and it basically just removes everything that's unnecessary in the RNA, the mRNA, and then it basically produces this mature mRNA. So mature meaning like it's had all of its touch-ups and everything, and it's ready to be made into a protein. So RNA processing still happens in the nucleus, but after RNA processing, the mRNA basically just kind of like wiggles through the nucleus and it moves into the cell cytoplasm. So the last step of protein synthesis is translation. So translation, I think, is like the coolest part, because basically what happens is mRNA, this mature mRNA, basically it just produces a protein, and a lot of things are needed. There's a lot of different components, but basically what happens, this GIF kind of shows it coolly, like these large blue ovals, they represent one ribosome. One ribosome has basically like two units, a smaller and a bigger one. And basically this mature mRNA is like red, and the ribosome basically helps connect these tRNAs, which are these like little stringy things. And at the top of these tRNAs are amino acids. So eventually these tRNAs that are bonding with the mRNA, they actually start forming this polypeptide chain. And I'll wait for the GIF to do it again. But basically what you see like right here, like that little like flash or explosion, that's that flash basically forms the peptide bond through the dehydration synthesis reaction that we talked about earlier. So basically the main purpose of translation is just to take an mRNA and produce a protein, and that's like the last step of protein synthesis. Any questions so far? Feel free to stop me like anytime. And yeah, this last step happens in a ribosome, and ribosomes are kind of just freely floating in the cytoplasm of a eukaryotic cell and also a prokaryotic cell. So yeah, it can happen anywhere. And these cells really have like hundreds, if not thousands of ribosomes. So one cell can be producing like thousands of proteins at one moment. Okay, so this is just like a summary of protein synthesis. We're just moving from DNA to RNA to protein. And protein synthesis is once again happening constantly in our body throughout all of our cells. So yeah, that's basically how proteins are formed within our body. So this is how the 11 non-essential let me backtrack real quick. This is how any protein is really formed in our body. And the essential and non-essential amino acids that we talked about earlier, those are all necessary to make the various types of proteins that our body needs. So if we don't eat like any protein, then the 9 amino acids that our body can't produce by itself would just basically be missing. And any proteins that require that amino acid in its polypeptide chain would basically not be able to form because our body can't produce that amino acid, and then we're not eating that amino acid, so we just lack that amino acid and then our body can't make any proteins that require that amino acid. So that's why ensuring that we eat foods that have, or that we eat all 9 essential amino acids, that's why it's essential. Okay, what is this? Is it just, okay. Okay, so yeah, protein synthesis basically depends on the amino acids, and also it's basically just coded for by the DNA in our nucleus. And in order for proteins to be synthesized, we need both essential and non-essential amino acids, and we have to rely on our diet to get those essential amino acids. Okay, so this is about protein structure. If you guys are taking the biochem class, you might have a little bit of, you might remember a little bit of this, but basically, the protein structure, it just has 4 parts or 4 levels to it, and each name is pretty like self-explanatory. Like the first structure, like the most basic structure, is the primary structure, and it's literally just the chain of amino acids. So it's just this linear polypeptide chain, and it's basically just like the sequence of amino acids for that protein. But then when we look at the secondary structure, it's basically, we're now looking at these alpha helices, which are these purple spirals, and these beta pleated sheets, which look like these blue arrows. What happens in secondary structure is basically hydrogen bonding occurs between amino acids. And remember, is hydrogen bonding like a bond or a force? Does anybody know? If hydrogen bonding is a bond, or is it a force, or like an attraction? If you're not sure, just guess. What do you guys think? The force. Yeah, nice, Caleb. So hydrogen bonding isn't actually just like bonding between elements, it's actually just like an attraction. So yeah, basically because of these hydrogen bondings, we have these alpha helices and these beta pleated sheets that form. But there's also a tertiary structure. So all proteins will have a tertiary structure, but not all proteins will have a quaternary structure. So the tertiary structure is basically just like any other interactions or attractions between these amino acids and beta pleated sheets and alpha helices. So the tertiary structure is basically just everything but hydrogen bonding, because secondary structure is specific to hydrogen bonding and alpha helices and beta pleated sheets. And then lastly, we have quaternary structure, which is basically like just multiple polypeptide chains together. So before, for primary, secondary, and tertiary, those will all just for one polypeptide chain. But when we get to quaternary, it's basically when multiple polypeptide chains are bonded together. And not all proteins have quaternary structure, because not all proteins consist of multiple polypeptide chains. So only certain proteins will have a quaternary structure, not all proteins will have a quaternary structure, but all of them will have a primary, secondary, and tertiary structure. Okay. So far so good. Okay, so now we're just going to go more into like specific to humans consuming proteins. So we're just going to be talking about like brief overview of like a couple of the functions of proteins in our body and how they like contribute to make sure that we function, and then also how we classify proteins, like just the quality of protein. So firstly, why do we need proteins? I'm just going to go over like 6 functions of proteins in our body, but there's definitely much more, and these are really just like overall or kind of like broad. So the first one is structure. So I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but collagen is a protein, and you might see people taking like collagen powder, like collagen supplements, and basically proteins like collagen, they basically kind of serve as like the scaffolding of our body, and they're really important for the structure of our tissues. And then proteins, well, enzymes are proteins, and enzymes basically catalyze biochemical reactions in our bodies. And does anybody know what catalyze means, like what it means to catalyze a reaction? It has something to do with like has something to do with lowering the activation energy. So it helps basically catalyzing these enzymes, they catalyze biochemical reactions. In other words, they just make the biochemical, yeah, nice, Caleb. They basically just make the biochemical reactions in our bodies happen much, much faster. Sometimes like thousands or even millions of times faster. So our bodies would be functioning like the reactions in our bodies would be happening really, really slowly if it weren't for these enzymes. So proteins, enzymes are proteins, so we need proteins to help basically our body function and keep all the reactions happening at the speed that they're supposed to be happening. And then also many hormones are proteins. So like a hormone is basically just this compound that's produced in our tissues, and it's released into our blood and as a result, it basically helps regulate our body processes, and it usually helps regulate our body processes by like affecting other organs. So like last week we talked about insulin. Insulin basically regulates our blood glucose levels, but there's also other hormones that can help regulate our hunger or our blood pressure, which is like insulin, because that helps regulate our blood glucose. And then the last three are immunity. So antibodies, I'm sure you guys have heard of them. Antibodies are actually proteins as well. And basically what they do is they just like recognize antigens, or basically anything that's not supposed to be in our body. And they basically just help generate like an inflammatory response. So basically if they see what's the word? Okay, yeah, basically if these antibodies detect like an imposter or something that's not supposed to be there, they'll basically just bind to these antigens, and just inactivate them. So antibodies are really important for us because they basically help keep us disease-free, although that they do fail us sometimes. And then the fifth function of proteins is transport. Basically, they just help move molecules that we need throughout our body and throughout and across cell membranes. So a really, really important one is hemoglobin, and it basically just helps transport the oxygen that we breathe throughout our body, because various chemical reactions and majority of our cells will need oxygen in order to function and to do the chemical reactions that are necessary. And lastly, proteins serve as a buffer, meaning that they basically just help keep the pH of our body from going too high or too low. And this is just like a side question. Does anybody actually know like the pH of our blood? I feel like you can yeah, Richard. Yeah, it's like about 7.4. It's between 7.35 and 7.45. So it's like dead in the middle of neutral. It's neither acidic or basic. It's really in the middle, and that's because of the proteins in our body. And actually, when we exercise, like if we start running, because we have like a lack of oxygen when we're exercising, our body will start producing lactic acid, and acid obviously is going to start lowering the pH of our body. So lactic acid is also like kind of that muscle soreness that you feel if you're doing like strenuous exercise. And then when we're recovering it's basically the proteins in our body that help remove or basically bind to the lactic acid in our body to make sure that our blood pH is back to neutral. And the reason why our blood likes to be like at that perfect neutral area is because a lot of chemical reactions in our body or biochemical reactions in our body, they can't occur if it's too acidic or too basic. So basically, it's really strategic, I guess, or it's probably just like evolutionary, that our pH, the pH of our blood is 7.34 or like about 7 or neutral, because it allows for the various chemical reactions that happen in our body to occur at like their fastest rate. So that's just like the functions of proteins. Any questions so far? Feel free
Wait,
to
how many
ask.
slides are left?
There's
7?
9, but like
8, I think.
yeah, but like 7 of them are actually like content stuff, I think. So yeah, this is now getting more into like food. So basically we can like, yeah, so remember how we talked about how there's basically 9 essential amino acids that we must get from our diet. Well, as you might expect, like not all foods have all 9. So proteins that have all 9 essential amino acids are called complete proteins. And basically they just have like adequate amounts of all 9 essential amino acids. And this would include things like, it's mostly animal products like meat, fish, milk, eggs. Those are all good examples of like complete proteins. And then there's also incomplete proteins that don't have adequate amounts of one or more of the essential amino acids. So it's lacking in one or more of these essential amino acids. And these are mostly just like non-animal products, so like plant-based products. So even though like most plant foods don't contain complete proteins, it doesn't mean that that they're not considered protein sources, because they still do have a lot of proteins or amino acids. But this just kind of shows how it's really important for vegetarians and vegans to basically pair like all sorts of protein sources together to make sure that they're getting enough of each amino acid. And speaking of eating protein, although it varies based on how much we weigh and like what we're doing in our exercise, and also your sex, generally we're supposed to eat about 50 grams of protein in a day. So this equals, to put it into perspective, this equals about 8 boiled eggs per day. So each boiled egg has about 6 grams of protein. So that's about like, if you eat 6 boiled eggs, that's 48 grams of protein. Not very tasty to me, but if you're down for that, then you can get all the protein that you need in a day from just 8 boiled eggs. And then a chicken wing has about 6.5 grams of protein in each wing. So once again, you need about like 8 of those. And then 1 cup of 1% fat milk has about 8 grams of protein. So you'd need only like 6 cups of 1% cow milk per day to meet like how much protein we need. And like that sounds like not that bad, right? Like I feel like it's eating the equivalent of 8 boiled eggs or like 6 cups of milk worth of protein a day is not that hard. And is it the same amount of protein with fried or scrambled eggs? I feel like it's about the same, but it's probably less because boiled eggs, I'm pretty sure, is like the most preservative of like the protein in it, but I'm not sure about that. So you could search that up. But yeah, we'll talk more about like protein, the amount of protein that we eat like right now, and related to protein powder. So I'm just going to go briefly over protein powder and then milk, and then we'll get into the activity. So basically like protein powder is literally just like powdered protein, right? It's basically, you make it by extracting it from animal or plant-based sources. So that can be like cow's milk, eggs, peas, rice, not white rice, and soy. And you're basically just extracting protein from these sources. And during the processing, you basically just remove all the carbohydrates, all the fats, the minerals, like the fibers, anything but the proteins. And then to make these protein powders, you can, manufacturers usually will add like other nutrients, or they'll add herbs or sweeteners and stuff like that to make them more tasty, because there's like protein powders now come in like various flavors, right? But most protein powder really isn't necessary for like most of us, because the average American consumes actually about 65 to 90 grams of protein per day, which is much more than what we need. If you're an adult, you obviously need more, but the 50-gram amount that I gave, that's like about how much you need for like teenagers, which you guys are mostly are. So for most people, it's really easy to reach the recommended amount of protein in their diet per day. And usually the people who are lacking protein are like older adults, and also people who exercise strenuously and they're trying to basically gain muscle. These are like the only two types of people who might benefit from eating more protein than the recommended amount, because as we age, we actually lose muscle. And so if you're older, if you want to help increase your strength and increase your lean body mass, this doesn't apply to most of you because you guys are not elderly, but when you are, you'd probably, and you want, if you are older and you want to like increase your strength, you probably want to boost your protein intake, because as we age, we lose most of our muscle, or some of our muscle. And yeah, so basically, unless you have like a really restrictive diet, like if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, a strict vegetarian diet, it's really easy to achieve the amount of protein that you need every day. And and I also included this in the third bullet point, but protein powder can be kind of risky, I guess. You have to just make sure that you're eating like a pretty popular, at least a certified one, and then you do your research, because protein powder isn't like, it doesn't go through the process that most of the food that we eat and most of the medicines, it doesn't go through that like FDA approval thing, because the FDA actually just like leaves it to the manufacturers to label and basically evaluate the safety of their products. So basically what you see on like protein powder labeling is probably not entirely accurate, because it's mostly for marketing purposes, because manufacturers are trying to sell, they really don't, they're not gonna like evaluate it really strictly and be totally transparent. So that's kind of like one of the risk factors of eating protein powder, because FDA doesn't actually like go through them. And I think there's actually a research like, or like a study a couple years ago or kind of recently, and it basically just tested like 100 or so protein powders, and they found that some of them actually had a lot of toxic stuff in them. So yeah, definitely if you're considering taking protein powder for whatever reason that might be, you really want to do your research on it, because at least right now they're not FDA approved. They don't go through the FDA approval process. All right, and then this is kind of a table that I made, and it basically just compares the different types of milk. So as you can see, like cow milk and soy milk are about the same in protein, and yeah, like cow's milk and oat milk, because oat milk is obviously made from oats, they have about the same carbohydrates, but I just thought this like table was pretty interesting. And the most important part, or the most interesting part, is basically these three lines, like the land use per glass, the water use per glass, and the gas emissions per glass of each type of milk. Because as you can see, like 1 glass of cow milk needs quite a lot of land, right? Because you're basically raising a cow and like feeding it. And also it uses significantly more water than any of these other ones. And the reason why almond milk needs so much water per glass is because like you have to grow the almond tree, and it takes a little bit before it can actually provide almonds. Sheep milk, I have no idea. Sorry about that. And then gas emissions, you can see cow milk is like 5 times more than most of them. And that's because like cows produce gas. Does anybody know why? Like, what about cows makes their gas emissions so high? Because like you'd think like you're just raising cows literally fart methane. So in the lifetime of a cow, they're going to fart a lot, and as a result, they produce a lot of gas emissions. Methane is most definitely not good for they're most definitely not good for our environment. And yeah, these are other just benefits, and this is just a graph of like the most protein dense per calorie like sources. So cod and then seitan. Seitan is just like a wheat gluten, but yeah, most of them on the top are animal proteins, but plant proteins, there's still various sources that have a lot of protein in them. And then yeah, as you can see here, like beef is very resource intensive. So yeah, a lot of like animal products, although they're really high in protein, they produce the most like greenhouse gases, and they take the most water and land. But yeah, it's about time to do a Gimkit or a Kahoot. I have both prepared, so okay.
We do Gimkit.
Can we do
Yeah, I'm gonna do a poll because I think polls are kind of cool, and you can just choose what you want. Yeah, that's
What if I want to do both because I can't decide?
Yeah, I don't know if we have time for both. Yeah, so it looks like Gimkit is
I want
like
to do both.
Gimkit is definitely winning like majority. Okay, so we'll just do Gimkit first. Here are the
Can we
results.
see the results?
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna go over this. This is basically like that table. This is where I got the info from the table from. This is a really cool TED video about like milk and stuff. Okay, so let me stop sharing this and then share Gimkit. We can decide which type.
What
we want
code
to
is
play.
it? What's the code?
There's no code yet because I'm not sure which type you guys want to play because I'm kind
Humans
of
versus zombies. Do humans versus zombies.
humans versus zombies. Anything else?
Drained mode.
No,
mode.
that one sucks.
No, I trust no one.
You lose money.
Trust
That's
no one.
bad.
I want to trust no one. What about
Yeah.
drawbacks?
Humans versus zombies.
No, trust no one.
Humans
I feel like
Trust no one.
draw that might be
Trust
difficult.
no one. Trust no one. Trust
No,
no
no.
one. I want to trust no one. Trust no one. Please.
Trust no one Among Us.
No.
Okay, how about
Let's
okay,
do a poll of the most popular ones. Wait.
do a poll.
Yeah.
Okay, what are the options for the poll?
Trust no one.
Trust no one in humans versus zombies.
Yeah.
Okay, just those two, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let me make the poll. I think you guys can see me making it. So humans versus zombies, and then what was it?
Trust no one. Trust no one.
Okay. So then
I don't see. Okay. Okay.
whichever one doesn't win this week, we can do next week because Gymkit is pretty cool and it's a 1 month free trial, so we can play it next week for sure. Okay.
Can we see the results? Yeah, I want to see the results.
I have to end the poll before you guys can see the results.
Okay.
But I think it's pretty clear which one is winning.
What?
Yeah, because last time only about 14 people, so I'll just stop it here. These are the results. So we'll play Trust No One this week, and then we'll play Humans versus Zombies next. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Trust No One.
Trust no one takes like half an hour.
Oh no. What do I choose for these? Should I just click continue?
I know, just put very precise on investigations to make it help. It makes it like quicker. Investigation reliability should be like
10,
very
10,
accurate.
10.
Very
Do 10.
reliable.
Very reliable. Yeah.
Very reliable. Okay.
It speeds it up so it's like
Okay.
it doesn't give
And
you any
is
wrong.
the numbers good for you guys?
Yes, the number's fine.
Okay. So we'll just click continue then, okay?
Yes.
Okay.
What's the code?
891449.
Can you type it in the chat? My screen just glitched.
Yeah.
891441.
449. 891449.
It says game full. Student
Wait.
accounts can only have host games with up
Okay.
to 5 players.
I think I had this problem last time I did the free trial. So I think okay. Yeah, I think this maybe that's yeah, maybe we'll just, yeah, we'll just go with Kahoot. I feel like that's like a safer option because I'm not sure why that's not working. Okay. Oh dear. There's music too. It's 5536712. I'll put it in chat too.
I asked for watermelon.
No, I'm not sending it. You finish that. I'll get it.
Okay, I think you guys can hear the music too now. Okay. All right, we'll start. Nice, nice. Peptide bonds. Hydrogen bonds are just between amino acids because like there's attractions. Or okay, that's a new name. I don't remember that name. All right. Yep, there's 20 of them. 9 of them are. Oh, I don't know if that's a question. Hint is that this type of reaction produces H2O. Yeah, dehydration reaction. Okay, I'm gonna speed round this. So as soon as it gets 12, I think there's 13 people though. Okay. Yep, complete proteins.
Why are all the answers blue?
For some reason I like can't hear you guys.
It's always blue.
Secrete hormones. Yeah, they don't secrete hormones. They literally are hormones. So it's our
Wait, everything just
tissues and our
glitched.
organs that secrete hormones.
I can't see the problem or the answers. Shoot, I was in first place.
See it?
Wait, I can't hear.
All I see is 6 out of 10. 6 out of 10. Oh,
I guess.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop showing computer science because I think that's
I was in 3rd place.
Because it lagged.
What?
I remembered this.
Okay, now I can hear. Okay. Yeah, these protein, like,
I messed up.
it's fine.
Oh no, I messed up.
Well, I'm pretty sure, like, I've literally seen someone have one of those as like their phone backgrounds because it's pretty neat. Oh, come on, this image isn't showing. Yeah, they're complete proteins. Right, this one's double points because it's a little bit of a review from like first week. So if you know this, good on you. But if you don't, I don't really expect you to remember because, yeah. But I guess the image kind of gives a hint because you really can't see two of the
It
choices.
says the liver.
It's actually a duodenum and jejunum because that's like the large intestine right here. Like the liver, you really can't even see it, or the pancreas. But yeah, if you got double points, if you got that one right, I'm pretty sure that can help you secure like a spot in the top 5. Dang, 5 out of 10 or 9 out of 10. Nice, nice.
If somebody could have got 10 out of 10, that would be perfect.
Yeah, fork in spork.
It lagged for me for like half the questions.
On.
I think you were going too fast.
Really? Okay.
Some of the questions only had like 10 seconds.
Yeah. Wait, actually, I think there's supposed to be 20. Just one of them had 10. But yeah, if you guys have time, I definitely recommend checking out this TED video because
Can you
I'll-
post the link in the chat?
Sure, let's see. Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'll put it on the Google Classroom and also other videos in the Google Classroom, but